And welcome back to our election special. The final five candidates. Joining me now, the Democratic frontrunner, Hillary Clinton. Welcome, Madam Secretary. Thanks very much for being with us.
Great to be here.
At your speech today, you reiterated your support for the Iran deal. Now, AIPAC opposes it. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said it's a stunning, historic mistake. Even your fellow Democrat from New York, Chuck Schumer, opposes it. Why are they wrong?
Well, as I said today, we have put a lid on the Iranian nuclear weapons program. Almost all of their enriched uranium is out of the country. The centrifuges have stopped spinning. We have detection measures that I think will give us fair warning. So I think on balance, it was the right step to take. But I've also said, look, I gave a speech last summer in which I made clear the slightest infraction needs to have consequences. I believe it's not trust and verify, it's distrust and verify. So I think we have to focus now on a lot of Iranian aggressive behavior while we enforce the agreement on the nuclear weapons program. I think that puts us in a stronger and better position going forward.
You took a shot at Donald Trump during the speech, not by name, but I want to play for our viewers what you said and then ask you about it.
We need steady hands. Not a president who says he's neutral on Monday, pro-Israel on Tuesday, and who knows what on Wednesday, because everything's negotiable. Some things aren't negotiable. And anyone who doesn't understand that has no business being our president.
Do you think he's not qualified to be president?
Well, I am quoting him. I think it's important to listen to what he says. You have to take him at his word, so to speak. He has been engaging in bigotry and bluster and bullying, and I think when it comes to understanding what he would do as president, there are serious questions that have been raised, and this campaign, should he be the nominee, will have to address them.
You're saying he's a bully, though?
Well, I think his behavior certainly qualifies for that. I think his incitement violence, his constant urging on of his supporters in large numbers to go after protesters, his saying, I want to punch people in the face, and telling somebody who did punch somebody, I will pay your legal bills. I think that raises very serious questions.
He says that as president, there would be a different tone, that he would have a more presidential tone. You've known him for a long time. Is there a different Donald Trump in there?
Who knows? I mean, you present yourself to the country, the way he's presented himself to the country over the last many months, calling Mexican immigrants rapists and criminals, saying John McCain was not a war hero, being reluctant to denounce the Ku Klux Klan and David Duke, and the list goes on. And so for me, I think you have to take him at his word, at how he's behaved and what he has said. And if you do that, then I think people have questions that deserve answers.
He makes much about his deal-making abilities, his negotiating skills. Are the skills used in business the same as that are used in statecraft? Are they applicable?
Well, if you run a business, and I've heard this from many, many business leaders, you have much more authority and control over your employees than if you are the president or the leader of a democracy. Political decision-making, listening to the full range of voices and opinions is something that our founders highly valued, as do I. So I think there is, in general, a difference, and I think a lot of the behavior we've seen from him raised some specific questions about what he would do.
You said at one point that you were I think it was the designated yeller-in-chief in relationships with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. You had a front row seat at the sometimes contentious relationship under the Obama administration. How would you be better? How would your relationship with Israel be better?
Well, as I said in my speech today, and it really is built on my many years, going back to the first time I went to Israel 35 years ago, and the work that I've done, the people that I've known and admired. I am staunchly in favor of Israel's security, and although we may have differences, which we do, I believe in treating those in a respectful manner, candid but respectful, which is what I have done in the past. And I think my firm commitment to Israel's security puts me on a very strong foundation to deal with whatever The questions might be in the relationship. But more importantly, we have to stand against what's happening in the broader region, which I think is not just a threat to Israel, but a threat to our other partners in the region and even to the United States.
What was the disconnect, you think, under the Obama administration?
You know, I'm not going to go into that. I think that the president has made very clear that under the Obama administration, Israel has been given an enormous amount of defensive capabilities. I mentioned the Iron Dome missile defense system, which has worked very well against the rockets coming from Gaza by Hamas. And I think there have been differences, but I think in general, the relationship remains very strong and central to American foreign policy.
You said today, though, you would invite the prime minister within the first couple of days of taking office.
Right. Well, I've known him a long time. I mean, that's one of my advantages.
Is it true you guys yell at each other?
Well, let's say we engage in vigorous discussion. And I like that. Look, we have a raucous democracy. Israel has a raucous democracy. I think those of us who are in the midst of the political activities in both of our countries understand that a give and take between friends is the best and most honest way to come to any resolution. So, yes, I've had my disagreements, but I've also never strayed from my strong commitment to Israel's security.
Would you move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem?
That's something that really has to be looked at in the context of a two-state solution. And I've always said that. I've always, supported that as a First Lady, as a Senator, as Secretary of State.
Would you commit to using the U.S. veto power over the Security Council to protect Israel?
Yes, I would. Yes.
No matter what?
Yes. Well, look, the talk now, I can't predict everything in the future, but in general, the answer is yes. But the talk now is to somehow try to use the UN through the Security Council to impose parameters on a settlement between Israel and the Palestinians. Number one, I don't think it works. And number two, I don't think that's the place for it to be hashed out. I think it has to be between the two parties. And remember, Anderson, I was the last person who brought Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Abbas together for 3 face-to-face meetings in 2010. The fact that I sat there and it was just George Mitchell and me and President Abbas and Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I watched the interaction and I listened to the issues that they were debating, actually gave me more encouragement and commitment to keep pursuing a two-state solution.
Ted Cruz is talking about on day one of taking the office, if he becomes president, of authorizing the movement of the embassy to Jerusalem. What's wrong? Why wouldn't you do that?
Because I think that would end any chance for a two-state solution. And I think it would, in the midst of a very dangerous region right now with many threats, not just aimed at Israel, but aimed at Jordan, for example, that Turkey and Lebanon and Egypt and others are coping with, it would light a fire that would add fuel to the flame of what's already so threatening in the region. And I don't think it accomplishes any purpose that would lead us to a two-state solution, but instead it could make it even more dangerous for Israel, and I'm not about to sign off on that.
We've seen President Obama is in Cuba right now. They've been cracking down on dissent in advance of his arrival. They're still protecting this woman who's the aunt of the rapper Tupac Shakur, who's convicted of murdering a New Jersey police officer. The State Department claims that it's in talks with Cuba to negotiate her return, but her attorney is saying Cuban officials have assured him her political asylum will not be revoked. Should President Obama have made her return part of the deal?
Well, I think what he did was to get an intelligence official, as well as we got the return as not part of the deal, but in addition, Alan Gross. And, having been involved in some of those negotiations while I was still Secretary of State, you push as hard as you can to get as much as you can. And I support the president's efforts to move the relationship forward. I think it's good for the Cuban people. I want them to have democracy and freedom. And I also want human rights respected. And I know that the president will be meeting with some dissidents, and I heartily approve of that. And I think we have to continually raise the issues of all of the dissidents. And That's what I hope he does, and I will certainly continue to do that.
I want to talk about ISIS a little bit. According to a police report obtained by the New York Times, authorities in Europe say that the Paris attackers used encrypted communications devices during the massacre there. If that is in fact accurate, do you believe it proves that major tech companies, most notably Apple, should cooperate with the U.S. and other governments unlocking terrorist phones?
I really want to see a resolution to this. Now it's caught up in the legal process, as you know. And I've said for many months, there has to be some way to protect our real physical security, to prevent terrorist attacks, to track down perpetrators while we protect online security. I think we've got a lot of really smart people in our tech community, in our government, who somehow have to come to terms with this because, you know, it is a serious problem for law enforcement, and it's also a problem for the tech companies.
Your critics say you're trying to have it both ways. You're not taking a side either between the government or the private sector.
My critics have never tried to solve hard decisions like the ones I've faced. You know, sometimes you have to keep working a problem until you get some break in that.
You don't think it is an either-or?
I hope it's not an either-or. I mean, I think it's still too soon to say whether it's an either-or because it's now in the legal process. You know, the federal courts can make all kinds of orders. I don't know what they will decide. But at the same time, people working in the tech community also have a stake in preventing terrorist attacks on our shores and in keeping people safe. How do we do that? And, you know, I think it's important to keep trying to work the problem and trying to find some common ground for people to work on.
Regarding the Supreme Court, Senator Sanders said last week if he's elected, he would ask President Obama to withdraw the nomination of Merrick Garland so that he could nominate a more, in his words, progressive candidate. Is that something you would ask President Obama to do?
No, what I want is to ask the Senate to do their constitutional duty, that it's time for them to quit the partisan posturing and receive the nominee, have the appropriate process go forward, including hearings as to whether or not to vote to confirm him.
If he's still, though, facing the nomination when you are, and you get the nomination, would you ask President Obama, would you continue to push for Garland? Or if you're elected, would you try to appoint somebody of your own?
You know, I think that is getting way ahead of ourselves. I mean, others can say whatever they want to say. I'm going to keep the pressure on the Senate where I think it belongs. Why would we lift the pressure off? Why would we?
Would he have been your pick if you were president?
You know what? We have one president at a time. That's something I want the Senate to remember. You know, there is one president at a time. Barack Obama is our president. He has a constitutional responsibility to fill that vacancy. He has exercised it by appointing someone, nominating someone that he believes would be a very good, qualified choice.
Do you think he would be a good justice?
Oh, look, I think he has a tremendous reputation. But let's focus on, we have one president at a time. He's made his nomination. We have a Senate that refuses to fulfill its constitutional obligation. And I believe and hope, perhaps, is more to the accuracy, I hope that as this election goes forward, and a lot of those Republican senators who are up for re-election, who are running in states where they're going to face increasing pressure to do the right thing, to stand up and tell their leader, hey, give him a hearing and let us vote. You don't have to vote for him. You can vote him down, but go through the process. That's what's required.
Last week, your daughter was out on the campaign trail for you in Salt Lake City, and she implied that you would want to extend Obamacare to undocumented immigrants. I want to play what she said so you can respond to it.
She thinks it's so important to extend the Affordable Care Act to people who are living and working here, regardless of immigration status, regardless of citizenship status.
Donald Trump took to Twitter attacking you, saying that now you want Obamacare for illegal immigrants. Just to be clear, are you in favor of extending Obamacare to undocumented immigrants?
There are two steps here. If someone can afford to pay for an insurance policy off the exchanges that were set up under the Affordable Care Act, I support that.
Even if they're undocumented?
Yes. If they can afford it, they should be able to go into the marketplace and buy it. But it is not going to apply to people who are in need of subsidies in order to afford that, because the subsidies question has to be worked out in comprehensive immigration reform. And what I do want to see is that we have more options for undocumented people to be able to get the health care they need. It's not only the right and moral thing to do for them, it's also important that we keep ourselves healthy, and public health requires that. So I see this as a two-step process.
At the debate in Miami recently, you were pushed on what you would do with the 11 million or so undocumented immigrants who are currently here. You had said no more deportations of children. You said you don't even really want to deport family members. Right. You want to focus on those who have broken the law. Are you saying no more deportations of anybody who hasn't broken, who is not a violent criminal? Because won't that just encourage more people to come if people know that there's not any chance they'll be deported as long as they obey the law?
Well, I think people who are already here have to be put in a separate category. People who have been here, some of them decades. I want to stop the raids and the roundups. I don't believe we should be breaking up families and deporting mothers and fathers. I think that is, really unnecessary. I want to go after people who have committed violent crimes. I want to go after people who pose a threat to our country's security, absolutely. But I want to get comprehensive immigration reform, and I want to start trying to get it as soon as I'm elected president, if I'm so fortunate enough to be.
It's obviously a very difficult situation, but doesn't allowing those who already broke the law and crossing the border illegally to come here, doesn't that reward them for breaking the law, the immigration law?
That there has to be a several-step process under comprehensive immigration reform. I do think people have to pay a fine because, yes, they came here without legal authorization. They have to pay a fine. They have to learn English. They have to be at the end of the line in terms of others who came here legally and are waiting to be processed. But they should be in the pipeline, and they should be given legal authority to work, which I think actually helps the whole economy because you can no longer exploit undocumented workers, pay them less, and endanger jobs of others. So I have a whole theory about how we can do this, and I don't see the purpose in breaking up families. I've met a lot of these families, Anderson. I've met, people who've been here for 1 or 2 decades, who have worked, who have supported their families, who some kids were born before, a lot of kids were born after, and they're citizens. And, there's a knock on the door, and all of a sudden, a father or mother is deported. I think we can send a strong message that we're literally drawing a line between those who have been here so that those who might think, hey, I could fit in under that line, are told no, they can't. And we have increased defenses along the border. Right now, there is no net migration from Mexico. In fact, Mexicans have gone back to their home villages and areas. So we know we can do a better job on border security. And then for people who do come, especially from Central America, they need to be treated humanely and fairly. They need to be given full due process to see whether they qualify under our laws to be given asylum status.
Just a couple of politics questions. You were not doing well with white male voters. You did well with them in 2008, not this time. I think exit polls showed you lost them in all 5 primaries last week. Why do you think there is that disconnect, and what are you going to do about it?
Well, I'm doing really well. Right now, I have more votes than anybody running. I've got more than 8.5 million votes, I think, and that's 1 million more than Donald Trump, and it's 2.5 million more than Bernie Sanders. So we're going to build on the broad, inclusive coalition we have, and we're going to keep adding to it.
Why do you think among the white male voters you have an issue?
I don't know, because I haven't analyzed all that data. In some places, I've carried white voters. In other places, I haven't carried white voters. But we're going to reach out to everybody. Nobody is, in my view, to be written off or left out. I want to reach out, and I think I have a message that will resonate with voters of all kinds.
Bernie Sanders has a new, I don't know if it's a line of attack or a new line he's been saying. I want to play that.
And let me say a word or two about my good friend Donald Trump. Just kidding, he's not my good friend. In fact, I never even went to one of his weddings, I just never did, right?
probably heard that one before.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. In a new CNN poll, Sanders does better against Republicans than you. Do you buy that?
No, I don't buy that at all. I think any horse race poll this far out is meaningless. And I also think that, and I'm proud of this, Senator Sanders and I have run a campaign based on issues. And we haven't been personally attacking each other and running negative ads. We've had differences on issues, and we have tried to draw the contrasts, which I think is fully appropriate compared to what the Republicans have done. I'm pretty well vetted. I think people have a good idea about, what I've been through, who I am, and I think that actually makes me the stronger candidate to go into a general election.
One of the things you said actually to me at a town hall, I think it was New Hampshire. It's been a while. We've done a lot of them. It was really personal, and I had never heard you said it before, and I think you've now said it once or twice, that this doesn't come naturally to you. Mm-hmm. That your husband, it's part of his DNA. It's not for you.
Right.
Is that, can you explain that a little bit more? Can you talk about that?
Well, it's funny because every time I have a job, I get really, really high ratings. Go back and look at my favorability ratings when I was Secretary of State and how well regarded I was when I was in the Senate and as First Lady, when I started, actually getting into politics. So whenever I have a job, I really work hard to do it to the best of my capacity. And I get good results. And I work across the aisle, and people who never have a good thing to say about me when I'm running for something actually say really nice things about me when we're working together. So doing the job, getting results for people, making a difference for our country, that's what I feel best at and what I am committed to doing. And I think that the kind of results that I get when I'm actually holding a position speak to that. But actually going out and campaigning, it is harder. It is harder for me. And it may be partly that it seems harder for women, and I recognize that. And also, as someone who has supported my husband and other Democrats for so many years, moving from he or she to I or me is not easy for me either.
Do you think you're held to a different standard? I've seen people on television saying, "Oh, you should smile more." That when you're yelling, it sounds, that when you're speaking, it sounds like you're yelling.
Yeah.
Do you think that's is that sexist?
Well, let me say, I don't hear anybody say that about men. And I've seen a lot of male candidates who don't smile very much and who talk pretty loud. So I guess I'll just leave it at that.
I've heard male candidates even yell.
Yeah,
one or two.
There have been a few of those around.
Just final question. I've heard some Democrats say that they relish the idea of you taking on Donald Trump this fall. President Obama clearly is geared up to campaign. Do you have any concerns that by having President Obama out there campaigning, and talking against Donald Trump, he's actually going to kind of play into Donald Trump's hands? It's going to elevate Donald Trump?
I don't think so. Look, I'm not yet the nominee. I hope to be the nominee, and I intend to run a campaign about the real issues facing our country and to knock down the barriers that are standing in the way of people getting ahead and staying ahead. That is really my, core commitment. And I want everybody out there campaigning on what we can do together. And I'd be honored to have the president. I'd be delighted to have others who are with me in making that case, whoever the Republicans end up nominating.
Do you feel like you know how to run against Donald Trump?
I know how to run a campaign that is about the real issues affecting the American people. And I believe at the end, Americans are going to vote on who they think can do all aspects of the job. This is like a big, giant, job interview. And at the end of the process, I really believe Americans are going to say who's steady, who's predictable, who gets results, who has the track record, the experience, the temperament to do all aspects of the job that somebody's going to start doing in January of 2017.
Secretary Clinton, thank you for coming to the Election Center.
Good to talk to you.
When we come back, Senator Bernie Sanders will join us in our Election Center.